Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on making the most of the ArchivesSpace Classifications module and Library of Congress subject headings at the University of Oregon. I'm Jessica Crouch, the Community Engagement Coordinator for ArchivesSpace, and I'm joined today by Lilia Benz and Alex Bizio of University of Oregon. In this webinar, Lilia and Alex will discuss their initiative to create interactive, browsable subject guides for new reference staff and patrons by making use of the Classifications module in ArchivesSpace. Lilia is the Special Projects Processing Archivist for Special Collections in University Archives at the University of Oregon. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Applied Mathematics from the University of Oregon and her Master's of Library Science with a concentration in Archive Studies from Emporia State University. Alex is the lead processing archivist in Special Collections and University Archives at the University of Oregon Libraries. She earned her MSLIS in Archives Management and MA in American History from Simmons College and her BA in American History from Santa Clara University. Before joining SCUA at the University of Oregon, she served as the Associate Archivist of the Jesuit Archives, Central United States in St. Louis, Missouri, and the Archivist for the Critical Theory Archive at the University of California, Irvine. We will hold all questions until the Q&A at the end. If you'd like to ask a question, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, and those questions will be read and answered during the allocated time for Q&A. If you have a general question or need some form of assistance or just want to talk to your fellow attendees, please feel free to reach out using the chat. You also have the ability to turn on closed captioning at the bottom of your screen. You can elect to show or hide subtitles by selecting live transcript at the bottom of your screen and pressing the little up arrow there. You can also elect to view the full transcript either in tandem with subtitles or in lieu of subtitles by selecting that option. And with that, I'll turn things over to your presenters. And Alex, if you'd like to start us off.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, thank you everyone and welcome to Making the Most of ArchivesSpace Classifications. As Jessica said, I'm Alex Bizio and I will be starting us off. So what are ArchivesSpace Classifications? Basically, this is a module that allows you to group your resource records and build out a hierarchy. It's basically like making a finding aid for your collections. The staff interface of this module looks and functions almost identically to a container list and a resource record. And similarly, the public interface displays the completed classification almost identically to how a finding aid displays in the public interface. However, when you click into a series in the hierarchy, it displays a list of the linked resource records the way ASpace displays search results, with the same additional filters on the sidebar. If we look back at early discussions of this module in ArchivesSpace forums, it reveals that there was very little consensus on how this module should or could be used. Most people determined that it was useful to institutional repositories that employed record group structures to intellectually organize their collections and felt that it should be labeled as such. It was pointed out, however, that this module could be used in a variety of ways by different institutions, and perhaps because of this, there seems to not have been quite as much of a push to standardize the labeling in this module to only reflect record groups. If you do a quick look via Google or any other search engine you might be using for examples of how repositories are broadly using this module, it's pretty consistent that a lot of them are using it to sketch out record groups or other subject-based groups of collections. SCUA at the University of Oregon has not historically used record groups to organize our collections, so this project took the latter approach using the classifications module. So the genesis of this project, how did this Library of Congress classification guide project begin? This project was inspired by a library carpentry demonstration that used OpenRefine, a web-based tool originally developed by Google for standardizing and exploring data sets in spreadsheets. After some experimental play with this tool, I became interested in OpenRefine's ability to explore and group sets of related elements within data. So as a new member of the SCUA staff with limited access to institutional knowledge, but still having reference responsibilities, I wanted a broader understanding of what kinds of collections SCUA held. As you can see here by the screenshot, we have over 4,000 manuscript collections and manuscript and record collections, and that is not including our rare books, with acquisitions dating back to the early years of the university. The last holistic guide to our collections was penned by Martin Schmidt in 1971, and this was before the merger of special collections and university archives. Originally, I had intended to use this information gleaned out of OpenRefine for like a non-dynamic infographic that could possibly help with outreach efforts or collection development, or just be kind of cool, but not very useful. I later realized this could be utilized to build a research tool out of the classifications module in ArchivesSpace. So you might be wondering why I would want to do this when we have our library catalog and ArchivesSpace for discovery purposes. But a lot of our cataloging in MARC records and finding aids, especially our subject heading cataloging, tends to be very specific. This is especially true for local history collections, and often they don't aggregate easily in a general search. As many of you probably know, ArchivesSpace Public pulls out all archival objects that contain a searched term. If somebody's just doing a quick word search, patrons have to purposefully limit searches to just collections or other levels of hierarchy. We also have libguides, but they tend to be pretty bespoke and labor intensive and are subject to becoming obsolete if they're not updated frequently with new collections under certain topics. They are also outside of any of our search mechanisms and are not necessarily intuitive to locate on our library website. We wanted to provide something browsable within ArchivesSpace, especially the public interface, so that patrons and staff don't have to hop in and out of multiple tools to provide subject-based help for patrons looking for collections on a general topic. So what are we going to cover in this webinar? We are going to cover how to repurpose existing data to build a repository subject profile using OpenRefine data exploration tools, as well as how to export subject-based collection lists for further analysis. I will be demonstrating the following tools as part of this workflow: MARC Edit and OpenRefine. After that, Lilia is going to demonstrate how to use subject analysis skills to build a classification hierarchy using your repurposed data. And finally, we will cover creating a hierarchical classification record in ArchivesSpace by hand. This process can be hurried along using the ArchivesSpace API, but we will not be covering use of the API as part of this workshop. So first, we're going to cover repurposing subject data to build a repository profile. There are two tools that we are going to be using that I already mentioned: MARC Edit and OpenRefine. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're looking especially for any resources related to using OpenRefine for library data, Library Carpentry has so many wonderful resources. I definitely recommend going there. I particularly used a site called Programming Historian that was also very useful to me. Oh, and here are some links. So first, we want to talk about choosing your data. So for this project, I decided to use controlled subject headings pulled from SCUA's MARC records rather than ASpace subject headings, and there were a few reasons for this. One, UO subject headings in ArchivesSpace were kind of a wild mix of local and controlled vocabularies. We have since cleaned this up. But at the time, it was hard to parse one from the other. Our MARC records, for the most part, are edited by experienced catalogers in the bibliographic cataloging department and tend to be a little cleaner. If you have cleaner data in your repository, you might want to use your subject headings in your ArchivesSpace instance. That just didn't happen to be true for us. I will say, however, that it may be difficult to retrieve subjects and retain the links to the resources they're attached to. You would need to use an API function to get those subjects out, and I'm not exactly sure that it would be easy to retain the links to the resource records. Bibliographic records do preserve those links that we need for this project. So that is part of why we chose this. So I also decided to limit the types of controlled subject headings I wanted to work with for this project. I wanted to work with topical subject headings only, which means I eliminated geographic, genre, and temporal headings. These are all retained in the ASpace record, so they will show up in the classification for further filtering. But obviously, if you try to do this with your own data, you can include whatever you want. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the MARC edit demonstration. And I think I need to do a new share. Hopefully you all can see this. So the first thing you need to do for this process is to export bibliographic data you want to analyze.
Alex.
Yes.
We are just seeing your PowerPoint, your Google Slides.
There we go. Is that better?
Now we're just seeing a smaller browser window. Now we're just seeing your desktop.
Yeah, that is correct for now.
Okay, good. Okay, good.
I am opening a program that lives on my desktop.
And we can see it. Okay, good.
Yes. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to export bibliographic data we want to analyze out of our ILS. Once you have a set of bibliographic records you want to analyze, you're going to want to get that information into a spreadsheet to import into OpenRefine. So we have already done that part. We happen to use Alma Primo for our cataloging at the University of Oregon, but it probably would vary how to do it from system to system. So I've chosen just to go over this starting from MARC edit. So we are going to basically get this bibliographic information we've already pulled out into a spreadsheet with the correct fields we want to choose. So to do that, we're going to select tools from our menu, go to export, and we're going to want to export some tab delimited records. So what you'll see here is that you'll want to have an in and out file already created for basically pulling in the bibliographic record you want and pushing out the spreadsheet. So I, again, have already done this. See, we have an in and we have an out. In the in folder, we have our MRC file that contains our bibliographic records. We're going to open that, and then we're going to want to choose a target for that to land. And here, so we will just call this subjects, CSV, and do make sure you choose CSV and not a text file. You're not going to get what you want if you choose a text file. And this says it, yes, we will replace it. Okay. So next, you're going to want to choose your fields and subfields you want in your spreadsheet. The nice thing about MARC edit is that it does let you limit to just what you want and not the full bibliographic record. So I'm going to choose creator, so our 100 field. and we'll do a 110 just in case we have any corporate bodies. We're going to choose the title, 245, and then we want our topical subject headings, so that would be a 650, and you do need to put the implied, I know in OCLC the A is implied, but here you do need to specify it. And then the 650X. All right, and then we're gonna export that. And it says, yay, we've exported it. Okay, wonderful. So now we have this spreadsheet in our out file, subject CSV, and we're going to want to put it into OpenRefine. Now, the data you're getting out of here is probably a little bit messy, but one of the nice things about OpenRefine is that it is meant to deal with messy data, so it will help us with this. So to create a project in OpenRefine, what we're going to do is browse to that CSV that we just created and hit next. And this is the preview of our data. So we've got the 100, 110, 245, 650A, and 650X. This looks good to me. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is create the project. Okay, so you'll see that there are some stray sort of, you know, MARC related, you know, punctuation and things like that in here. In your 110s and 245s, that doesn't really matter. The data we do need to be clean is your 650As and your 650Xs, because these are the terms we're going to want to explore. So what we're going to do, the first thing we need to do is get these long strings of subject headings into individual cells. If you do not do this, basically OpenRefine is going to read this long string as a single value, and that is not something we necessarily want. This is not one subject heading, it's 3 subject headings. So we're going to go ahead and do that by hitting edit cells, split multi-valued cells. So we see in our strings that they are separated by a semicolon. So we're going to go ahead and tell the computer to split it at the semicolon, which it did. And we can do the same thing for the X column. Wonderful. So some other cleanup you'll probably want to do just to make sure your your terms are consistent would be some common transformations. You're going to trim your leading white space. And then you are also going to go ahead and do a find and replace to get rid of anything like periods, especially in long strings of subject headings tend to show up. So to do that, we just say find this period and replace it with nothing, which it got rid of 9,000 periods. So finally, what we're going to do is start exploring our data. And to do that, it's pretty simple. We're just going to go ahead and run something called a text facet on this column. And as you can see over here, we have basically a count of all of the headings in our MARC records. So this is a comprehensive list of every single subject heading used in our topical subject heading used in our repository. You can sort it by alphabetically, but I prefer to look at it by count so that we know which are the most used subject headings in our repository. And you can see here we have authors American and university and colleges, which makes sense given that we are kind of a literary manuscript repository and a university archive. So the last thing that we're going to do for this step is basically get that full list of all of our subject headings, and we're going to copy it into a spreadsheet. It will take all the counts with it. And then I turn that over to Lilia to do some further exploration. And I'm also going to turn the presentation over to her. Oops, stop share. There we go.
Alrighty, so I will go ahead and share my screen. There we go. All right. Maybe. Okay. So the following tools will be discussed throughout this next section. Classification Web, or ClassWeb, is a robust subscription-based service that provides access to Library of Congress classification schedules, subject headings, and name authorities. Library of Congress Authorities, or LC Authorities, is a free, open access resource that provides access to Library of Congress subject, name, and title authorities. I have found it to be less streamlined than ClassWeb, but the information provided is comparable. The Library of Congress Classification Outline provides a list of letters and titles for the main classes of LC classification. Clicking on any class produces a list of subclasses and their associated call letters. This outline is not as robust as the one available on ClassWeb, but for the purposes of this project, a more generalized hierarchy does suffice. OpenRefine, as discussed earlier, is a free open source tool that can be used to clean up unruly sets of data. As stated previously, Alex created a spreadsheet of topical terms using OpenRefine. There were a total of 1,908 individual topics at the start of the project, a daunting number when faced with the task of creating a streamlined outline. I asked Alex to create a list of topical terms that appeared 10 or more times among collections. Although 10 was an arbitrary choice, I reasoned that focusing on these terms first would provide a decent snapshot of general subject categories for the bulk of our collections. In addition, working with a smaller subset of terms would be less overwhelming for creating a preliminary classification outline. The abridged spreadsheet only contained 136 topical terms, a much more manageable number when compared to our initial 1908. But I still had to come up with a way to organize the terms in some sort of hierarchy. My brain immediately went to Library of Congress classification. I remembered learning about assigning call numbers to items based on subject matter from a cataloging course that I had taken during my master's program at Emporia State University. In the course, we were taught to align with the general principles of classification as set forth by the Library of Congress, and to be as specific and objective as possible when classifying works. These were and are principles that our archive practices when assigning subject headings to collections, which is partly how we arrived at our spreadsheet containing almost 2,000 unique topics. Our archive already assigns Library of Congress subject headings to our collections. In addition to ArchivesSpace Public, collections are searchable through the General Library Catalog, which uses LC subject headings. So I asked, if our subjects were being used to create an LC call number, where in LC classification would they fit? Thus, I took the 136 topical terms from the abridged spreadsheet and initially classified them by choosing LC main classes from the Library of Congress classification outline. Here you can see an example of where I assigned some main class call letters to a few of these topics. From there, I created separate sheets for each call letter and added terms relating to those letters to each sheet. Terms like women Christian educators, which I classified as belonging to B, philosophy, psychology, religion, and L, education, were added to both the B sheet and L sheet. Once I had subdivided all of the terms by main class letter, I looked at each individual sheet to begin the subclassification process and make more specific correlations among the terms. Let's take a look at my B sheet. You may notice that my two subclassifications, religion and missionaries, are not LC classification headings. For this presentation, I have included specific LC class correlations to show the differences between my broad analysis and LC's more specific analysis. I wanted to create the fewest number of subclasses possible. So I felt that religion encompassed all specific denominations, denominational churches, and general followers, and that missionaries applied to terms specifically related to missions. Depending on my desired degree of specificity, I assigned subclassifications based on facets where I devised the titles, or I used those already established by the Library of Congress. The following is my initial hierarchy, including collection counts for each classification or subclassification. Not all LC main classes were represented at this stage of the project. However, as I was only working with an abridged list of terms, I anticipated the need to add further LC main classes and additional subclasses. All things considered, creating the preliminary hierarchy provided a sense of whether choosing the LC method of classification would be feasible on a larger scale. We also gleaned a general idea of where the majority, and I use this term very loosely, of our collections fit under a broad classification schema. Once the LC method had been approved by Alex, I created a workflow to engage other members of our processing staff in the project and employ their assistance with assigning main classes for the additional 1,772 topical terms. The workflow provided a ClassWeb demonstration and tips for conducting subject analysis, which I will share in the following examples. Here, I will go through a demonstration of how to use ClassWeb to conduct subject analysis. From the main menu, select Search under LC subject headings. You'll be prompted to enter your login credentials, so go ahead and do so. Then enter a subject term into the subject heading search bar. For this example, I chose farm life. Occasionally, as in this example, correlations are visible directly underneath the subject term. We can see HT 421 sociology and S 521 through 522 agriculture attached. I will provide another example where this is not the case in a moment. To view class correlations, select the white box to the right of your term. This will bring up a drop-down menu from which you will select LC class correlation. From the provided list, focus on the first letter of each classification. This will determine the broadest level of hierarchy. Next, compare these letters against the main classes listed in the Library of Congress classification outline. You can do this in two ways. Link to the Library of Congress classification outline website. It doesn't list every subclassification, but it is a handy tool for selecting main classes. Or by linking to ClassWeb's LC classification outline. This provides a more in-depth hierarchy than the website and is slightly more compact, so there is less scrolling. If the subject term correlates to more than one main class, as in my example, select one or two main classes that you feel most closely relates to the term, but be as broad as possible. Now, obviously, you do not have any of these materials in front of you, nor do you actually know at this stage the collections to which these terms are attached, so you will have to use your best judgment. For additional guidance, you can also look at the parenthetical number next to each correlation. This number dictates how many bibliographic records have made a particular correlation. For farm life, we see 47 records attached to S521, 7 attached to HT421, and so on. Statistically speaking, it is a pretty good bet that farm life fits well with main class S and possibly H. If we look back at the classification outline, we see that S is the agriculture class. Farming is a synonymous term for agriculture, so I would say that this class fits. H is the social sciences class. It may not be readily apparent that this class correlates, but if we look at the H subclasses, we see HD, industries, land use, labor, and HT, communities, classes, races. Industries and land use both fit with farming, and communities fits with the life aspect of the term. You may ask, why not record the subclasses now? You could, but I find it's best not to overwhelm yourself with too many details at the start, especially when dealing with such a large data set. In fact, if we look back at my initial iteration of the classification outline, you'll notice several classes that didn't require subfaceting. In general, my advice is to make a quick decision classify as broadly as you can, and then move on to the next term. You will make additional decisions about subclassifications once all of the terms have been assigned a main class. As promised, the following example will not provide correlations directly under the subject term. You will have to rely more on the LC class correlation tool. Consider the term track and field coaches. At the top of the screen, select New Search. This will bring you back to the subject heading search screen, and you can enter your next subject as we did in the farm life example. When you pull up the LC class correlation, you will notice that there isn't a correlation specific to your exact term, but rather a list that includes several subdivisions. To find out more about a classification, just click on its link. Doing so will bring you to a screen that shows how that classification fits into the overall LC class hierarchy. Clicking along the linked terms at the top of the page will take you further up the hierarchy. Compare the first letter of the classification to the LC classification outline, and then record the main class in the topic spreadsheet. In this case, I would choose main class G, Geography, Anthropology, Recreation. Catalogers like to use the term aboutness. What is a resource about? What is it? And what is it for? Consider this when you are analyzing your topical terms. Why would a particular term have been attached to a collection? Also keep in mind that subjects are specific and are chosen to capture the essence of the topic of a collection or resource. I want to think back to the track and field coaches example. What is this term about, or why would this term have been assigned to a collection? I would consider assigning this subject heading to a collection of materials used by someone in the profession. For example, Bill Bowerman was a track and field coach at the University of Oregon from 1948 to 1972. His papers include correspondence, journals, athlete information, and photographs reflecting his career as a coach. It would be perfectly reasonable to assign track and field coaches as a subject heading for his collection. And in fact, it is assigned to his collection. In LC classification, somewhere between GV 1060 and GV 1098, which covers recreation, leisure, sports, track and field athletics, would be a logical choice. However, as we can see on the correlations page, there is also a classification for track and field coaches in PS, which is a literature subclass for American literature. Was Bill Bowerman an American? Yes. Did he write? Yes, he even published a book entitled Jogging in 1966. However, the materials in his collection are more about the sport of track and field and about his career as a coach. Thus, I would be hesitant to assign a main class in the literature field. As I previously stated, ClassWeb is a subscription-based service, but don't let this deter you from performing a subject analysis project. There are other free tools available for use through the Library of Congress. I will go through my farm life and track and field coaches examples to assign main class headings through use of LC authorities. From the home page, select Search Authorities. Ensure that Subject Authority Headings is selected as your search type, then input your topic, farm life, into the search text. From the list of subject headings, select the red Authorized Refs and Notes box associated with your chosen heading. Then select Authority Record. Select the link for your topical term associated with the heading 1XX field. The authority record provides information about the subject heading. Scope notes are included in 680 fields, and any LC class correlations are included in 053 fields. If you're not comfortable with MARC tags, you can toggle the record to a labeled display. Compare the LC class correlation to the Library of Congress classification outline and record the main class letter. At the top of the screen, select New Search and input your next topical term, track and field coaches, into the search text. From the list of subject headings, select the red Authorized heading box associated with your term. Then, select the link for your topical term associated with the heading 1XX field. For this example, there aren't any listed LC class correlations. For topics such as this, you will have to do a more in-depth analysis and rely on the Library of Congress classification outline. Consider why the term track and field coaches would have been assigned to a particular collection. I would think that this term was assigned to a collection that had materials relating to the sport of track and field. Where would sports fit in the LC classification outline? Sports could fit in a recreation category, so we will select Class G. From there, we will select subclass GB, and indeed, there is a subsection related to sports. Therefore, we will record main class G for this term. Once each topic had been assigned a main class or classes, I sorted the spreadsheet by class letter and then transferred topics into 22 separate sheets, 21 for each of the main LC classifications and 1 for a few straggler agent subjects that had been accidentally included among the topics. From there, I considered the total collection count for each LC main class. Any class that had fewer than 100 to 150 prospective collections attached, I set aside, as these classes would most likely not need further hierarchy. Much like assigning subclasses for my preliminary hierarchy, I chose subclass titles directly from the Library of Congress classification outline, as well as devised my own titles dependent on my desired degree of specificity. I started using subclassifications from the preliminary hierarchy and added or edited as needed as I made my way through each class sheet. I then used Excel to determine collection counts for each subclassification. For example, I started with 4 subclassifications for the social sciences class, which is class H: women, commerce, organizations, clubs, and communism. After main class analysis of the full topic spreadsheet, Class H had by far the most unique topics at 493. Class P was second at 293. And Class H had the highest collection hit count at 1439. Class P was a close second at 1229. I eventually settled on 11 subclasses to include in the final hierarchy, only one of which, organizations and clubs, kept its title from the preliminary hierarchy. At just over a quarter, 25.8% of the number of topics from which we initially started, 493 topics was still a fairly large number to handle. Therefore, I relied heavily on the use of the LC class correlation function in ClassWeb for my more in-depth subject analysis. To select subclassification facet terms, I clicked on the provided links to see where my topic fell within the LC class hierarchy. I then focused on the first 2 to 3 subdivisions to create my facet term. Again, if you do not have access to ClassWeb, you can still do the subject analysis by referencing subclasses in the Library of Congress classification outline. Occasionally, I determined that a topic could fit into more than one facet term. For example, I attached farm life to communities, classes, races, and to industries and commerce, industry, agricultural. Once I had assigned subclassification facet terms to each topic, I used Excel to determine the collection count for each facet term. I accomplished this by using the remove duplicates tool and then summing each count if it was associated with my chosen term. To do this, select all of your subclassification facet terms from column D and copy them into a new column. I copied mine into column F. Then select cell F2. Under the Data tab in Data Tools, select Remove Duplicates. A window should pop up showing that column F is selected, and then click OK. You should now be left with a list of unique facet terms. To determine collection count for each of these unique terms, use the following SUMIF function in column G cells. This function tells Excel that if a term or set of terms in column D matches the term in your selected cell from column F, then it should add the collection count value from column B. To further clean up your list of facet terms, copy the terms from column F into a new column. I chose column I. Then delete any cells that contain multiple facet terms. Next, compare your terms in column I to those in column F. Sum any column G cell that correlates to a facet term in column I. You now have a complete list of unique facet terms and their associated collection counts. I took this process a step further and combined facet terms to create broader subclassification terms. For example, I transferred all of my industries and commerce industry subdivisions into one subclassification. With creating subclassifications, my goal was to avoid creating huge disparities in the collection count. I did not want one subclassification with only 1 or 2 attached collections next to 2 other subclassifications that had over 100 attached collections. If this occurred, I broadened my scope. Once a final hierarchy had been established, I used OpenRefine to create collection lists for each main class and subclassification. I have included some statistics regarding the number of subclasses assigned to each main class here. To create lists for each main class and subclass in OpenRefine, simply reference your Excel sheet, and I would recommend sorting your lists alphabetically, and select Include next to each term in the facet filter box for each term on your Excel sheet. Once you have included all desired terms, select Export. From the drop-down menu, choose excel.xls, rename and save your new spreadsheet, then move on to the next class or subclass. To exclude all of your included terms in OpenRefine, simply select Reset All. This will bring back all collection options from the full collection topic spreadsheet. The subject analysis project took about 6 months to complete. However, I was only working 20 hours per week at the time and splitting my hours between working remotely on this project and working on site processing other collections. I was brought into this project in June of 2020. Main classes for each of the 1,908 topics were assigned by the end of August, and spreadsheets detailing collections with their corresponding classes and subclasses were completed by the end of December. And with that, I will hand it back over to Alex.
All right, so I'm going to quickly go over how to actually build a classification hierarchy in the ArchivesSpace Classification module. All right, so now that you have your content, which are the spreadsheets that Lilia was talking about that have basically all the collections listed that are correlated to the topics that she analyzed, we will want to create our classification. So to do that, we will hit Create, the Create tab on the staff interface, go to Classification, and then we will have our new classification. You'll want to enter a unique identifier. We'll just do class and classification. And then you can put in a brief description and identify yourself as the creator of the classification. If your classification is not going to have a hierarchy, so it's going to be a flat list of collections, you can add any collection records you want to here. So any of those resource records that you want added by hitting record link. But since we're going to have a hierarchy, we're not going to do that at this point. So this should look pretty familiar if you've ever created a resource record in ArchivesSpace. Building a classification hierarchy with groups and subgroups, in this case, classifications and subclassifications, is exactly like building a series and subseries structure in the resource record. So to add what would be a series, or in this case, a classification, you will want to add a child off of your main heading. So we'll call this class 1. I can't spell. If we wanted to put a subclass under that classification, we would add child again, just like if we were going to do a subseries. And if we wanted to create something at the same level of hierarchy, we would add sibling. So again, this should be pretty familiar if you're used to building container lists. So the difference, however, is instead of basically describing the physical material that you would if you were building a container list in this record, instead you're just going to add whatever collections go to this subclass here at this level of hierarchy by hitting Add Record Link. So that will pop up this box. This is a little bit similar to adding topic containers if you're familiar with that. Same kind of idea of it's pulling in another separate record from the database and attaching it, linking it to this. So let's do that. And we'll search. And then we will save. So basically that is how you build a hierarchical classification. As I said earlier in this presentation, you can also use the ArchivesSpace API to batch load collections into a group or subgroup, a class or subclass. We, however, had a student assistant do this part of the project as part of a COVID-19 remote work assignment. So finally, our conclusions. As this work has basically been done during the pandemic, we haven't actually been able to do any in-person reference at UO and still need to do a lot of user testing of this module to see if it truly does assist our patrons and staff with broad reference questions. But we have started incorporating adding these classifications, particularly terms used in the LOC classification guide, to resource records as part of general processing. So we will continue to add collections to the guide and continue to build it. And with that, are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Alex and Lilia. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and open the floor to questions. We do have one question in the Q&A, but please feel free to go ahead and start typing your questions in now. So Alex, going all the way back to the very beginning, what was that first tool that you used to create the spreadsheets? Looks like you're working on a Mac, so I don't recognize the tool. And if you are on a Mac, is there a PC equivalency?
So I am actually on a PC. So the very first program I used is MARC Edit. So let's see if I can actually get, I actually provided a link to the program in, so let's see if I can get that link to launch, possibly not. So yeah, it's basically a tool that lets you play with any bibliographic record data that you're going to export out of your ILS. In this case, I wanted to take that data and just basically turn it into a spreadsheet that I could manipulate. But I think there are so many things that you can use MARC Edit for that I am not being, a bibliographic cataloger, am not familiar with, but I think it's actually a very, very powerful tool. But yeah, so MARC Edit is what I use to get that into the spreadsheet. Basically bibliographic data, let's scoop it up and put it in a CSV. So yeah, and this, I think it's an open source tool, fully downloadable, and there is a link in our slides.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, and we'll make sure that a link to Alex and Lilia's slides are included with a copy of the recording. So a link to that will be provided. Next question. Can we see an example of the published guide in your publication?
Absolutely. That is something I realized after we had written it, we had failed to do. All right, so we'll go back to, can everyone still see my screen?
You can.
Absolutely. Great. So here are all the classifications that we have played with since starting to use this module. We've got a few subject guides that are just very specialty, a few of my tests, and here's the LOC subject guide. So we'll hit view. And here it is. So this is the back end. This is the staff interface. And basically what we have is Lilia's outline, all kitted out with all of our subclassifications underneath. Very beautiful work. So basically what this, if you click, like we're gonna look at pioneers and hopefully it will load. So I will say one thing about this module, and I think it's because it's dealing with so many record links, it does move rather slowly. I think it's just whatever the database is doing is kind of complicated and it just takes a lot of processing power. So be patient with it. It's a delicate machine. So basically what we have here is our pioneers subclassification. The University of Oregon was, founded in the 1870s. So we've been collecting a lot of pioneer stuff for a long time. So basically here are all of those resources linked to that classification, and it goes on for many, many pages. Again, that's what the back end looks like. If we're looking at the front end here, and this is, this is an option on any instance of ASpace. So we'll go to classifications, library of class, Congress subject guide, and we will try to find pioneers again if we can't find it. All right, and we'll see if it loads. All right, so here's that same classification on the public side. So again, we have a list of what looks like a list of search results. This is just collection level records, and then we have the additional filters on the side. These could include, and as you can see here is a genre term. That's something I filtered out of the initial data that we analyzed. But if you are only interested in Pioneer Diaries, you are perfectly welcome to click on that additional filter that was retained in the ASpace record, and it will just bring up 62 diaries out of those 200 Pioneer collections that we identified. So is there something else that you would like to see specifically with this?
And feel free to ask that in the Q&A. And you addressed this already in doing that demo. So how has the use of the classifications impacted the response time of your search results?
As I said, the general search doesn't seem to be affected at all, which is pretty nice. But if you're interacting directly with the classifications module, it is a bit slow. Like I said, I think it's just, it's so many complex record links. It's pulling in subjects and agents, and yeah, I think it's just a lot for the system to handle. So yes, it is a little bit slow.
Thanks. And just to clarify, you are creating this hierarchy across all of your collections in ArchivesSpace, correct? You're not creating subject headings per collection. It's for all of the collections.
Yes, this is for all of the guide. Yes, broadly is for all of the collections. I have encouraged our curators, if they want to create something more specific for their teaching purposes or collection development purposes, they can, but this particular guide is for all of our collections.
Thanks. Another question in the Q&A, is there any way to import the finished CSV file into ArchivesSpace? You're welcome to answer it, but and people can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I think that that if you aren't able to do it the manual way that that Alex and Lilia just demoed, the API might be the next fastest option. But I'll let you answer.
Yes, you can do it via the API, which would upload the finished CSV. We simply chose not to do that because we were trying to keep our student assistants employed through the pandemic. So that was a really nice work from home task for them to do.
All right, another question. So let's say you don't have the MARC records to start out with, but you would like to build a classification schema like this in ArchivesSpace. Do you have any recommendations on where to start?
That is a good question. Again, you could do more experimenting to see if you could get that, because the problem is, and the reason the bibliographic records are so nice is because they retain those links between the collections and the subjects. That is not something we've been able to figure out how to do it with the ArchivesSpace API. That doesn't mean it's not possible. We just haven't figured out how to do it. So I guess if you try to do that, just keep in mind the reason that this works is that you are maintaining those linkages between the collections and the subjects attached to them. If you just have all your subjects, I mean, you could build out a repository profile, but you have no idea to what collections those subjects belong. So it'd just be probably a really cool pie graph of all of your collections subjects, but no linkages. Again, we used MARC records because that seemed to work the best. We haven't tried anything else, but I'm not saying that it is impossible to do it with the API. We just haven't figured out how to do it.
Thanks, Alex. I was kind of pausing to see if Lilia wanted to chime in. No pressure. But we'll move on. We have one more question and we're at the hour. So I'm going to read this question. We're going to answer it quickly and that will conclude our webinar. So are classifications shared across multiple repositories within ArchivesSpace, or are they repository specific?
As far as I'm aware, they are repository specific. We really only use one of our repositories in special collections. The only other one we have linked to here is records management, which I'm not sure they would find this useful. They might, I don't know, but we haven't tested it.
And I actually don't know for certain the answer to that either. I would say test it. They may be shareable like a subject heading, but I'm not sure. If someone knows that's attending and wants to submit that in the chat, please feel free. All right, so that is everything in the Q&A, and we're a little past time. So with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude the webinar, and I want to thank Alex and Lilia so much for being here and walking us through that process. That was super informative and super useful. I'm sure that we all learned something. And thank you all for attending and sticking it out until the end. This recording, as well as a copy of all of the slides, will be included or will be provided soon, and those slides will be included with the recording. And with that, I will go ahead and stop recording and end the webinar, and I look forward to seeing all of you at the next ArchivesSpace event. Thanks, Alex and Lilia.